Thank you very much. Buenos dias. How y'all doing? David Johnson, director at Pindrop. Hopefully everybody realizes that this is going to be in English. Sorry, I will do my best to talk slow, and when I go too fast, just do this, and I'll start to slow down. So, security at the speed of sound. Interesting title. What we're talking about today is how do I authenticate my users? How do I prevent fraud? That's really what we want to talk about. And customers sometimes they have both issues, sometimes they have one or the other. But it's interesting that 90% of consumers say, if I have a bad experience with you, I'm going to find somebody else to do business with. 3 times, I'm gone. Sometimes even less. So how do I make it easier to do business? For customers that are moving to the digital business, omni-channel retail, omni-channel banking, your investors are expecting you to do 20% more revenue than people that don't do that. So there's a lot of pressure to, how do I make it easier to do business with me for my end users? This one I like, I fall into this category a lot. KBA is a knowledge-based question, which is that, oh, I've forgotten my password, I need to reset it. And the customer goes, oh, who's your 3rd grade teacher? Okay, make sure I typed it in right or sorry, okay, no, next question. What city were you in 1964? Well, I wasn't born yet, so that one doesn't count. But those interesting questions. Oh yeah, who was your first dog's name and what color was it? I don't know. But again, just frustrating to get those kind of questions just to reset your password. And then lastly, that companies are spending $10 billion US a year globally on fraud and authentication solutions. And some of them are easy to use, some of them are, quite honestly, a little more challenging and difficult. Hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay, that button. Interesting thing is that, we've heard a lot of presentations this morning talking about, online fraud, checking applications. Interesting is 60% of all financial fraud goes to the phone, still today. So yes, online fraud's a big deal, breaking into websites, but 60% of all fraud still starts with a phone call. There are 90 attacks every minute around the world into a contact center. So 90 hackers are trying to break in every minute to a call center to steal money, typically, information, but almost always money. And lastly, that fraud in the contact center is up 350% over the last several years. COVID didn't help with everybody working from home, but huge growth in fraud. And I was talking to a bank earlier this week, and they told me for every if they lose $10,000 to fraud, US dollars, they have to come up with an incremental $100,000 of revenue to offset that loss. So even a little bit of fraud is significantly expensive to your customers. It's a balancing act, though. Too much security, people get frustrated, they go somewhere else. Not enough security, you're losing, they're stealing your customers' money. So you got to find, there's a balance you must find in there. And what we try to do is we try to figure out ways to reduce the friction. How do I make it easier for a customer to do business with you? And more importantly, how do I make it easier to make sure that customer is really who they say they are when they're trying to do business with you? That's the goal of these technologies today. And a nice thing is on the top of that, because we're going to make it easier to do business, at the same time we're going to reduce the operational costs in your call centers in terms of number of calls, number of agents that have to handle it. So there's a plus side as well. You're going to make your customers happy, and you're going to save a lot of money while you do it. So here's the things we'd like to talk about, areas we work on. So the first thing we'd like to do is, let's check the device. What we do is we create a phone print of this device. So if David Johnson is calling up his BBVA bank, and is David Johnson actually calling from his iPhone? Is it his phone number? Has that phone number been spoofed? Is it really coming in on an AT&T network from Dallas, Texas? Or is it coming in on a voice over IP network from South Korea or North Korea? How to check that? Make sure, step one. By the way, customer didn't have to do anything to get that authentication step. It's just boom, it just happens. You can actually catch 60% of all fraud just by verifying the phone number coming in. It's a real phone number. It's coming in from an expected carrier. It's not a voice over IP, and it's not spoofed. 60% of fraud, boom, gone, just by doing that little step. And again, doesn't cost anything for the customer. Simple to do, straightforward. Lastly, let's talk about one of the things we specialize in is voice security. So this is not the old, my password is my voice, please authenticate me. No. What we do is we actually create a mathematical representation of the sounds that come out of your throat. So we don't care if you're talking English, Spanish, Japanese. We're going to create a mathematical representation of your voice. So when you call into, let's say, a firm, you want to check your balance. Firm A's going to say, yep, it's coming in on, it's David's phone, or well, Uriel, it's Uriel's phone number. It's Uriel's phone, and yes, it's Uriel's voice. We've authenticated him. He hasn't had to type in a PIN. He hasn't had to answer any silly questions about, mother's maiden name, personal identification information. We know it's him. Very easy to do business. Lastly, the other things we want to look at, we know it's, other thing we look at is biometrics and behavior. If I need to ask somebody a PIN, humans type in, I got to type on my PIN. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If a hacker types in a PIN, you know what a hacker does? He has a computer that sends it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We could tell the difference. We talked about some behavioral analysis earlier, some of the earlier presentations. You'll hear about behavior analysis later on this afternoon. Again, trying to figure out who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. It's pretty important. So, device, something you have, the network you're coming in on. These are the things we like to look at for companies that you need to focus on, and you can eliminate a significant amount of fraud without ever having to work with a customer, without ever having to irritate or make a customer mad. And that's kind of critical. Real world example, bank in the United States. They were having some fraud issues and some authentication issues. So they looked at, what do I get per millions of calls? Annual savings per million calls. This bank actually has 10 million calls a year into their call center. Pretty large, pretty good sized bank. First thing they did is, they actually, on their system, they cut 50% of fraud just by checking the phone numbers coming in. Boom. And by the way, that's new users and existing customers. Obviously, if you're a brand new customer, we don't have a phone, you don't know who the phone number, they don't have a phone number yet. They're not enrolled as a user. But we can tell if they're coming over a voice over IP network from, let's say, North Korea, you probably don't want to let them go much farther into your system. You probably want to stop it right then and there, or at least send it over to a fraud expert. Anybody here in the call center space that runs call centers will understand that last line. If I'm saving 30 seconds, 50 cents US per call. It doesn't sound like a lot. Oh, wait a minute. That's 1 million calls. That's 30 million calls a year. That money adds up very, very quickly just by saving that little bit of 50 cents per call. Lastly, because I've authenticated them and I know they're not fraud, I get to let them stay inside the IVR and they don't even have to talk to an agent most of the time. Because I've come in and I know that, it's their phone number, it's his phone, it's the right network, it's the right voice. That's a green level user. That user can do a platinum. That user can do anything they want. Transfer balances, add an authorized user to the account. I don't even need to talk to an agent if I don't want to. Self-service increase. Again, customers tell us that it costs anywhere from $1.50 to $3.50 US every time an agent has to answer a phone at the call center. So I can reduce the number of agents that have to actually talk to a person. If the customer can get everything done, they don't have to talk to the agent or sit on hold for 10, 15, 20 minutes waiting to talk to somebody. They can do it all themselves. Customer sat goes up, costs go down. So, this is almost 300,000 US dollars per million calls in pure savings for this customer. But it's a balancing act. We talked about, too much security doesn't work, not enough security. The call center, the call center agent, or the VP of the call center, he cares about customer sat. We've got a chief fraud officer over here that cares about fraud. The call center person may not care about fraud. They just want to make everybody happy. You got to make sure all parts of the organization are on the same page and talking to each other. So it's a balancing act. You have to find that sweet spot. What are the required capabilities? Do you have the technical staff to implement some of the technology, or do you need to go to a partner to implement some of this technology? Do you get buy-in from your stakeholders? That is critical. So these are the things we like to sit down with our customers and with our partners and kind of walk through. What are you trying to do? Do you have an authentication problem? Do you have a fraud problem? Do you not know what problem you have, but you just have a problem? That's okay too. We can work through that. It becomes very interesting to sit there and staff that. Interesting use cases come up quite a bit recently, and I was surprised until someone explained it to me. So I've been talking about authenticating a user when they call you. Well, with COVID, a lot of call centers put their agents at home. Okay, great, they're working. How do you know that agent sitting in their house is actually that agent? Did they log on and go make dinner and then all of a sudden their spouse is now taking calls for them? Ooh, there's a significant financial liability. So this technology can actually do the reverse as well. We can actually make sure that the agent sitting at home talking to the customer is actually, yes, it's the real agent. It's not the spouse, it's not the children, it's not the nanny, but it's actually the right person. And again, I didn't even think about that, but that's hey, thank you, COVID, for one more thing we have to worry about, right? So those are the things we like to talk about. Again, I've been doing this in English. If you have any detailed technical questions you want to ask, and there we go. We will be in the back, and the Infinity people have promised they'll actually help do any kind of translation if we need that for help. That is it. So I'm going to try to get us back on time. But I want to thank you very much for your time. Thank you for putting up for the guy up here in English. And if you have any questions, again, we'll be in the back. Feel free to come chat with us. Thank you.